It is now time for our feature presentation. Feature. Coming straight from your house. Coming straight from your house. Coming. He's the one. Coming. The king of only. He's groovy and never glooby. You can't get this from an egg. The sensation from your screen. The show that makes you scream. Say it with him, folks.
Mr. Anten. Mr. Antennas. Mr. Antennas. TV time.
That was something. Undertale is a game about decisions, and it's certainly not the first nor the last to implement this so heavily as a mechanic. But I would say it's one of the best ones to this day. Games, even nowadays, handle decision making very differently. If they would delve in decision making at all, they would include decisions that would be laid out for the player in an obvious manner. You either choose to go down this way, or say this or that. In games such as Until Dawn and Life is Strange, Undertale does it way more intricately and nonchalantly, if you will, which is something everyone likes seeing nowadays.
Ladies, I'm trying to do my work.
In Toby Fox's works, decisions wouldn't be so obvious for the player, and they would have to commit to an actual mindset to find the endings that they're looking for. It's not as easy as saying I love you or saying end yourself to your favorite character. There's one thing very apparent in Undertale. Since the beginning of the game, some of the characters entice the player to save or to try things differently. Even the game mechanics tell you this. The fact that there is a fight and spare button means that there is a difference between doing the two. In your run-of-the-mill JRPGs, you usually have the options of fighting or running away, and you'd pick the latter only if the battle you're up against would be too scary. Therefore, giving the player the ability to choose, and how even Toriel reprimands you for fighting instead of sparing or even talking, gives the player a sort of hint. A hint that points to there being many different possible scenarios that could play out, depending on your decision. Decisions that aren't so blatant like in other games where most of the time you get an immediate reaction to the dialogue option selected or path chosen. In Undertale, it's so much more subtle. And even though Deltarune doesn't try to live up to its predecessor, or even be similar to it, in the sense that the characters in the game itself tell you that decisions don't matter, Toby is not lying here. He wants you to think that decisions as they were mapped out in the last game are no more. He wants the player to think that no matter who you fight or spare, there won't be any difference. And ultimately, this is true. Nonetheless, this doesn't mean that the decisions you make in specific interactions in the world would make no difference. And this couldn't be harder from the truth, especially from Chapter 2 onwards. In the first game, decisions would end up in one of three scenarios. You would have the pacifist, the general route, and the neutral. Most people in the first playthrough go through neutral, and have to revert back to understand why they got an ending they didn't see in this past week's Jacksepticeye's gameplay. This is why in Deltarune it's even more subtle than that. Deltarune overall has been in the cooking pot and it shows. For the soundtrack in this game is already longer and it's barely halfway done, according to the chapter list. Definitely, Deltarune has a long way to go still, and we will be fed quality delicious Toby Fox slop for years to come. Deltarune is in essence a better game overall, longer and more complete, with Easter eggs and character nuance spread everywhere, and all the while, Undertale still stands out. Without Undertale, there would be no Deltarune, and I stand by this. If Deltarune were a standalone game, it probably wouldn't be half as praised as it is in current day, and that is not to undermine the work, but to appreciate what came before it even more. Why then was Undertale so emblematic, so great in what it was trying to say, and so grand, even now counting with the sequel? even though originally Undertale was shorter, took less time to make, and came out complete. Well, Undertale and Deltarune both have something that was stood very well by the developer, and I think apart from the interesting gameplay and RPG mechanics, is these two elements that I'm going to be talking about. I'm no expert in storytelling, but I, like many people, can tell when something is good enough for it to stand out on its own. And Undertale stands second to none. I would go as far to say that Undertale is the perfect game. The music and the character visuals are two aspects that I think games do exceptionally well. The music, first and foremost, is what separates these games from separate titles, and how there is this little thing called the leitmotif that really drives the emotion home, especially in the first game. Music tracks, such as Home, Shop, and Memory, all share the same building block tune. And this, instead of repetition, feels more like a reminder that the story is moving forward and that the story has been building up to something special since the start. When you hear in Hopes and Dreams that the same melody that you heard every time when opening the game, then you know that this is a milestone. You feel much like the anime protagonist feels when the opening starts to play in the final battle. It's a primal feeling that Toby Fox and Tammy in the first game captures so well that it drives the emotional weight of the story and feels like it was all meant to be. Once again, especially in the original game. Deltarune does a very good job with music as well, but with more standalone tracks and not so heavy on the leitmotif gimmick of the first. Still, these artists' work in the music department is what I think is the biggest feature of this game, and is definitely what you relate to the most if you consume any kind of content at all. There are times in which I overhear my mom scrolling TikToks, and there are times in which I can hear the shop theme from a totally unrelated artist, but it's still there. The music has gone a long way to make this game as memorable as it is, even with tracks from Deltarune such as Root Buster and the Attack of the Killer Queen. The character sprites on the background come in close second as one of the most important elements of the franchise. Let's start with the backgrounds. The backgrounds in both games are great, but I think that they shine more in Undertale. Most of the places in this game are beautiful, and even though the character sprites themselves made a huge upgrade in the second installment, there is something about Undertale backgrounds and locations that are just so grand and interesting that everyone wishes they could have been explored more. Deltarune, I believe, isn't so keen to develop its backgrounds as much due to the darkness theme, and therefore having to include very little background in order to drive said theme home. The characters. Thankfully, the characters in Undertale are the same ones in the sequel, and therefore you guys won't have to hear me repeat myself so much in this video. Generally, characters take center stage, having classics such as Sans, Metaton, and Asriel. Their writing makes for funny and compelling storytelling. Sans is considered to be one of the most interesting video game characters ever, and this isn't without foundation. Sans brings charisma, funny commentary, and even an ominous backstory, one that would have fans theorize and speculate, even to this day. Metaton isn't too far behind. Even though they're not nearly as popular as Sans is, he is as present in the game. For the rising action segment of the plot, he becomes the main antagonist, and comes with snarky dialogue and lovable interactions with the player. For even if he's trying to destroy you, he still shows charisma. Deep down, he's just a robot who has been built for a purpose, and the fact that he fails miserably makes him a good character, an entertaining character. And then there's Asriel. Asriel appears in both games without changing his name. Even so, for the grand narrative of both games, he takes on a persona with an alias, and is almost never seen in either game as their real counterpart. There's very little that's known about him, at least from the game files alone. But looking at the narrative of both games, there could be something that points to the greater scheme of things and the messages that these games want to send into the world. It's not only the personality of these characters that makes them likable and interesting, it's their iconic design too. One thing that is mostly agreed upon when talking about good character design is knowing their purpose or intentions just by looking at them, and not necessarily knowing anything about them. Right off the bat, looking at Stan's lacy outfit and sandals with that upbeat smile tells the player that this character is at the least not to be taken seriously, and that he is a layout. Metaton, being a literal microwave, tells you that he isn't really that dangerous and that he is charismatic. Asriel's multiple designs also help this claim. Being one of the only young characters in the game hints at him having some sort of importance or connection to the main protagonist. And then you have Fresk. Not only are they young too, but they're the perfect slate for the self-insertion character due to their dubious gender. This is true for Deltarune as well, having a severe improvement in all and every sprite that the game has. I like to see Deltarune as how George Lucas had the Star Wars chronological order since the start. Looking at Toby Fox's older tweets, one can tell that his original plans were working on Deltarune instead of Undertale. When he first dreamt of making this game, he got inspired to do so because of a dream he had, in which static things would come to life in the darkness. Darkness being a very important trope in Deltarune, and good and bad in Undertale. Evil and therefore darkness takes a much more subtle role than in Deltarune, as darkness is a literal enemy we get to fight, an entity that is integral to the story. In Undertale, being good or bad is imposed upon the player, and it's a decision that one can take in order to change the story. There are things in both games that they both tread upon but treat rather differently. This makes the games feel slightly different, all the while not feeling too unfamiliar in their storytelling. Much like the name suggests, both titles are a retelling of very similar stories. Evil in Undertale isn't only present in the players themselves, but the humans as a whole, so much that they banish them from the surface world, but also destroy most of the population to the point that only a fraction of their former numbers could live in the underground. The darkness in Deltarune is much more present and drives the story forward, letting most of the plot points take part in said darkness and not be revealed through the player. You actually interact with the darkness in Deltarune. You don't so much with evil in Undertale, aside from Flowey. All of the other characters in the game aren't strong or dangerous enough to actually pose a threat to the player that could culminate in them suffering. Only Flowey and Sans can manage that. However, the darkness in Deltarune can also take part in the player as much as evil does, with the fabled Snowgrave or Weird route. When I first heard of this being a possibility after having finished Chapter 2, I thought that people were straight up lying. But knowing Toby and how much he likes his secrecy, I eventually gave it a try. Snowgrave route shows an evil and a darkness so deep that it rivals even that of the cruelest of Kara's actions. It is one driven much more in the suffering rather than annihilation, and it shows, especially with how much centralized and individualized it is towards Noelle. It is pretty much obvious, again from chapter 2 onwards, that Noelle has had it rough, ever since the disappearance of her sister, much like the disappearance of Kara and Asriel from the first game. In this case, however, nobody really knew what happened to her, or at least it's not talked about enough to actually give anything the player can go off of. It is thought that Das went through some kind of accident and that she's not a part of this world anymore. However, with the present themes of the game, it isn't a stretch to link this personality to another character which we don't know much either about, and this would be the Knight. Not much of a shock since they have antlers much like the whole family has. And just like George, Toby wanted to give Deltarune an even better treatment than Undertale, and therefore waited for the perfect time to literally show his actual dream onto the world with the much awaited sequel. We still have yet to see how his true vision unfolds, but I don't think that Deltarune will ever stand up in the name of Undertale as Toby's greatest work, because Undertale is just so much filled with emotion and lovable characters, interesting mechanics, that one can't help but love the game and be thankful that there is a maybe unrelated, maybe related sequel still in the works, and that the gift just keeps on giving. I want to thank you, Toby. If you ever watch this video, I'm sure that Undertale is a game that most people remember fondly, and that has marked countless lives and childhoods, mine included. I want to thank especially my viewers, for if you're new or if you've been here for a while now, know that I couldn't be more grateful to have every single one of you here and listen to my literal passion projects. Thank you, everyone, for having such an impact on the community and for making all of this possible. Let it be known, I love Undertale. I'm sure a lot of us do. Thank you for making a difference in the gaming landscape to this day when it is so transformative and corporative. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Well, there you have it. There you have it, folks.